During a family dinner, my daughter-in-law suddenly exploded at me, shouting, "Get a job and stop being a pest." Instead of reacting with anger or shame, I couldn't help but laugh at her outburst. You know that saying, "Hell hath no fury," like a woman scorned? Well, imagine a woman who's been dismissed, belittled, and called a pest in her own home by someone she secretly supported, and then realize that woman has been sitting on a $60 million secret for decades. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the quietest person in the room decides to unleash a storm so devastating, you won't believe it's real. My name is Margot. I'm 59 years old, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one nobody bothers to notice. That lesson? It became my guiding star on the night everything changed. The night my daughter-in-law, Courtney, made the single biggest, most entitled mistake of her pathetic little life. It was a crisp October evening in suburban Chicago. Was, as I always did, hosting our monthly family dinner. But here's the thing. I wasn't hosting it at my own quiet, modest apartment, the one I preferred. No, this dinner was at the family house in Lincoln Park. You know, that beautiful 4-bedroom home where I grew up, where my dad still lives? Yeah, that one. What they didn't know was that I'd secretly bought it 5 years ago. My dad's finances had gone completely sideways after his second divorce, and I had to step in. He had no idea. As far as he was concerned, he'd landed this incredible, too-good-to-be-true lease-to-own deal through some generous, anonymous investor. The monthly payments he made? Straight into an account I controlled. He thought he was building equity, towards eventually owning it, but really, he was just making payments to me. It was just one more way I'd learned to protect my family, to solve their problems, all while keeping up the charade that I was the one who needed help. Oh, the irony. The dining room was so warm that night, filled with the scent of my grandmother's pot roast. It was a smell that always brought me back, a comfort. I'd set the table with my mother's good china, not because it was a special occasion, it absolutely wasn't, but because I truly believe every meal should have a touch of elegance, even if nobody else appreciated it. And usually, they didn't. My son, Michael, arrived first. He always did. He carried a bottle of wine and that familiar, apologetic smile of his, the one he'd worn since childhood, the one that meant he was already bracing himself, knowing he was about to disappoint me. At 34, Michael was still that gentle soul I'd raised, but marriage had twisted him, changed him in ways that honestly broke my heart a little more every single day. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled, giving my cheek a quick kiss. It was a kind of mechanical affection, you know? Like he was already steeling himself for whatever storm his wife was about to drag in. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, my fingers automatically smoothing his collar, just like I used to when he was tiny. "How was your week?" Before he could even answer, the front door slammed open. Not opened, slammed. Hard enough to rattle the pictures on the walls. Courtney Morrison Hayes. She'd hyphenated her name, of course, because, as she'd so eloquently put it, Morrison sounds so much more sophisticated than just Hayes. She swept into my house, or what she thought was my dad's house, like she owned the damn place. At 28, Courtney was undeniably beautiful. That Instagram-perfect kind of beauty that demanded 2 hours of preparation and strategically placed lighting. Blonde hair that probably cost more than most people's rent. A figure maintained by personal trainers I couldn't even dream of affording. But beauty, I'd learned long ago, means absolutely nothing if it isn't backed by character. And Courtney? She was a black hole where character should have been. "Margot," she barked, not even bothering with a hello. "We need to talk about Thanksgiving. Michael's firm is having a dinner at the country club, and obviously we can't miss that for some sad little gathering here." I just smiled, kept arranging the silverware. "Of course, dear. Family comes first, doesn't it?" I dripped sarcasm, just a tiny bit, but she completely missed it, too busy checking her reflection in the china cabinet glass. "Exactly," she chirped. "I mean, you understand how important networking is for Michael's career." What I understood was that Michael's career had been perfectly fine before he married a woman who measured success by zip codes and country club memberships. But I said nothing, just kept setting the table, for 4, including my father. My dad, Walter. At 78, he was still handsome, in that silver fox kind of way that had attracted women his entire life. Too many women, as it turned out. He'd left my mother for his secretary when I was just 25. A cliché so painfully ordinary, it still made me sick to my stomach. My mom, God rest her soul, she never recovered from that betrayal. She spent her last 15 years as a shadow of the vibrant woman who'd raised me to believe in love and loyalty. Dad remarried twice after Mom died, always to younger women who saw dollar signs in his pension and Social Security checks. His current wife, Sandra, was wife number 3, a 45-year-old former cocktail waitress. Fake everything, real ambitions. They arrived, of course, fashionably late. Sandra always insisted on it. "It's good to make an entrance, darling," she'd told me once, as if my modest apartment was the Met Gala. "Margot, darling," Sandra cooed, air-kissing me with lips so inflated they felt like plastic against my cheek. "You look comfortable." That was Sandra's special way of saying I looked poor, which I suppose I did. I shopped at Target, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lived in an apartment that, while clean and cozy, certainly wasn't featured in Architectural Digest. Let them think what they wanted. I'd learned long ago that people reveal more about themselves when they think they're superior to you. We gathered around the dining table, and for the first 20 minutes, conversation flowed with the practiced politeness of people who tolerated each other for the sake of family peace. Dad talked about his golf game. Sandra complained about her tennis instructor. Michael mumbled something about a case he was working on. I just served the food, asked the right questions, and played the role they all expected. The aging single, mother, living vicariously through their much more exciting lives. Then Courtney, 3 glasses of wine deep, clearly feeling bold, decided it was time to show me exactly who she really was. "You know, Margot," she said, stabbing her pot roast with more force than necessary, "I've been thinking about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, refilling her wine glass with perfectly steady hands. "Well, you're almost 60, you've never remarried, you don't have a career." She waved her manicured hand dismissively. "I mean, what do you actually do all day?" "Michael," she glanced at him, shifts uncomfortably in his seat. "Courtney, Mom has plenty to keep her busy." "Does she, though?" Courtney interrupted, warming to her theme. "I'm just saying it can't be healthy to just exist. Maybe it's time to think about getting a job, contributing something to society instead of just being a pest." The word hung in the air, thick and acrid, like smoke from a fire. A pest. She'd called me a pest. At my own dinner table, in front of my own family, while eating food I had prepared with my own hands. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad stared at his plate. Sandra examined her nails. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear completely. But me? I just smiled, took a slow sip of my wine, and felt something cold, something calculating, settle deep in my chest. "A pest," I repeated thoughtfully, as if I were trying the word on for size. "How interesting." Courtney, emboldened by my apparent calm, pressed on. "I don't mean it cruelly, of course, but you have to admit, Margot, you're not exactly productive. You don't work. You don't have any real hobbies. You just sort of hover around the edges of everyone else's life." She leaned back in her chair, pleased with herself. "I'm just thinking that maybe it's time to get a job, contribute something meaningful, stop being such a pest to people who are actually trying to build something." I set down my wine glass, slowly, deliberately, and I looked at this beautiful, arrogant child who had just, in that very moment, made the most expensive mistake of her life. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking away the seconds. And then I smiled. Not the polite, accommodating smile I'd been wearing all evening. No, this was something sharper, something dangerous. "Young witch," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Find a new place to live." Courtney blinked. Clearly, she hadn't expected that response. "What?" she stammered. "Find a new place to live." I stood up, beginning to clear the dishes with unhurried, almost serene efficiency. You have 30 days. She laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. Margot, what are you talking about? This is Michael's apartment. No, I said, not looking at her as I stacked plates. It's not. My dad finally looked up from his pot roast. Margot, what do you mean? He asked, confused. I turned to face them all. These people who had spent years looking through me, dismissing me, treating me like an inconvenient obligation. The cold, calculating feeling I'd felt earlier was spreading through my veins now, like ice water. And I found I rather liked the sensation. I mean, I said, with the same pleasant, even tone I'd used earlier to discuss the weather, that this house, the house you've been living in for 5 years, Dad, it actually belongs to me. I bought it through a holding company when your finances went south after your second divorce. You've been making lease payments to me this entire time. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face went white. Mom, I said a lot of things, I interrupted gently. People hear what they want to hear. You needed a place to live. I provided one. You assumed it belonged to you. I never corrected that assumption. Courtney was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. That's impossible. We pay rent to a property management company, which deposits those payments into an account controlled by Robbie Holdings, LLC, I continued, a small knowing smile playing on my lips. Which is my company. You've been paying me rent this entire time, dear, though I have to say you're about to be evicted. The silence that followed was beautiful. It was the sound of a world shifting, of assumptions crumbling, of a pest revealing she had teeth. You're lying, Courtney said finally, but her voice lacked all conviction. Am I? I walked to my purse and pulled out my phone. Should I call my property manager right now? Have him explain the eviction? Process to you? My dad cleared his throat. Margot, sweetheart, I think there's been some confusion. The only confusion, I said, looking directly at Courtney, my gaze unwavering, is how a 28-year-old girl who's never worked a real day in her life thought she could call me a pest in my own home. I finished clearing the table, moving around them like they were simply furniture. When I was done, I turned back to Courtney, who was sitting frozen in her chair. You said I should get a job, I reminded her. Well, dear, I already have one. I'm a landlord. And effective immediately, you're being evicted for verbal abuse of the property owner. Courtney's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Sandra was staring at me with something approaching, dare I say, respect. My dad looked utterly confused and worried. Michael just looked sick to his stomach. 30 days, I repeated pleasantly. The notice will be served tomorrow morning. I do hope you have somewhere to go. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool October air rushed in, like a promise of change. Thank you all for dinner, I said with perfect politeness. Drive safely. And Courtney, you have 30 days to find new accommodations. The eviction notice will be served Monday morning. They filed out in stunned silence. Courtney's heels clicked against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it and smiled. A pest? She called me a pest? Well, young witch, you're about to learn that some pests are harder to exterminate than others. And this particular pest? She owns the very ground you're standing on. And this particular pest had 60 million reasons to make your life very, very complicated. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. feeling more alive than I had in months. There's something truly invigorating about having a purpose, especially when that purpose involves the complete and total destruction of someone who so thoroughly deserves it. My first call was to Patricia, my financial advisor. She answered on the second ring, despite the early hour. The wire transfers are already processing, she said without preamble. You'll have ownership of all 3 properties by noon today. The shell companies are established, the paperwork is filed, and your legal team is standing by. Perfect, I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. What about the investigator? Marcus Chen, former FBI, now runs his own firm. Specializes in deep background investigations for high net worth individuals who need to protect themselves. Completely discreet, completely thorough. I smiled. Send me his number. I have a project for him. My second call was to James Morrison, my attorney for the past 12 years. The only lawyer I'd ever met who understood that sometimes the best legal strategy involves completely overwhelming your opponent before they even realize they're in a fight. Margot? James said, sounding pleased to hear from me. Patricia mentioned you might be calling, something about an eviction, among other things. How quickly can you prepare a formal notice of termination of tenancy for now, today? I want it served this morning. There was a pause. That's unusually aggressive for you. What's the situation? I gave James a condensed version of the previous evening's events, watching through my kitchen window as Chicago slowly woke up around me. Office workers rushing to catch trains, parents walking children to school, delivery trucks navigating the narrow streets, all of them going about their normal lives, completely unaware that 3 blocks away, a woman named Courtney Morrison Hayes was about to have the absolute worst day of her life. Jesus Christ, Margot, James said when I finished. She actually called you a pest at your own dinner table. She did, and now she's going to learn exactly what this particular pest is capable of. I'll have the papers ready within the hour. But are you sure you want to move this fast? It's going to be a shock to your son. I'd been thinking about Michael all morning, my gentle, sensitive boy. He'd inherited my brain, but his father's soft heart. He was going to be collateral damage in this war, and that hurt more than anything Courtney could ever say to me. But sometimes you had to hurt the people you loved in order to save them from themselves. Michael will understand eventually, I said. Right now, he's so blinded by that girl, he can't see what she really is. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they can see clearly. Your call. I'll have the process. Server over there by 9 a.m. My third call was to Marcus Chen. Miss Robbie, he said, in a voice that suggested he'd already been briefed by Patricia. I understand you need a comprehensive background investigation. I need everything, I said. Employment history, financial records, personal relationships, social media activity, shopping habits, travel patterns. I want to know things about Courtney Morrison Hayes that she doesn't even remember herself. Timeline? I want a preliminary report by this afternoon and a complete dossier by the end of the week. Money is no object. I like clients who say that. I'll get started immediately. By 8:30, I was dressed and ready for the show. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that could pass for designer, but had actually come from Target. Modest jewelry and comfortable flats. The goal was to look like exactly what they expected. A middle-aged woman of modest means who'd somehow stumbled into property ownership. Let them think it was luck or accident or some kind of clerical error. The truth would be so much more devastating. I positioned myself at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee and a clear view of the building where Michael and Courtney lived. At exactly 9:20 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit got out, carrying an official-looking envelope. Process servers are a special breed. They have to be part messenger, part detective, and part actor, depending on the situation. This one looked like he could handle whatever reaction he encountered. I watched him enter the building and waited. 15 minutes later, he emerged, got back in his car, and drove away. My phone rang immediately. Margot. Michael's voice was tight with panic. Mom? I think there's been some kind of mistake. We just got served with an eviction notice, but it says the property owner is something called Robbie Holdings LLC, and I've never heard of... That's me, sweetheart. Silence. Then, what? Robbie Holdings is my company. I own your apartment building. Have for 3 years now. That's impossible. We pay rent to Lakefront Property Management, which is my property management company. The rent payments get deposited into my account. More silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to process information that didn't fit with his understanding of reality. Mom, I don't understand. If you own the building, why are you evicting us? I'm not evicting you, Michael. I'm evicting Courtney. The lease is in both your names, but the eviction specifically cites her behavior toward the property owner as grounds for termination of tenancy. Her behavior? Mom, What are you talking about? I sighed, suddenly feeling a little tired. Ask your wife about last night's dinner conversation, sweetheart. Ask her about calling me a pest and telling me to get a job. Then ask her why she thought it was acceptable to verbally abuse her landlord. She didn't know. She didn't know because she didn't ask. She assumed, like everyone else, that I was just poor old Margot with no power and no options. Well, she was wrong. I could hear voices in the background. Courtney's voice, high and sharp with panic. Mom, she's saying this is all crazy. That you can't just evict people for no reason. There's plenty of reason. Read the notice, Michael. It's all there in legal language. But where are we supposed to go? We can't just find a new place overnight. You have 30 days. And Michael, you personally are welcome to stay in one of my other properties. Just you. The eviction notice specifically applies to Courtney Morrison Hayes. Another long silence. Then Courtney's voice, clearer now, like she'd snatched the phone. Margot, this is insane. You can't kick us out because of some stupid dinner argument. I can, and I am. You called me a pest, dear. Well, this pest owns your home, and now you don't have one. This is illegal. I'm calling a lawyer. Please do. Make sure to mention that you verbally abused your landlord in front of witnesses. I'm sure they'll find that very interesting. The line went dead. I set down my phone and smiled. Round 1 was complete. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Process served successfully. Client was advised of their rights and given contact. Information for tenant resources. They did not take it well. Another text. This one from Patricia. Property acquisitions complete. You now own 47 rental units across 3 buildings in prime Chicago neighborhoods. Total value $4,200,000. You officially have a real estate empire. And then, surprisingly, a text from Marcus Chen. Preliminary findings already interesting. Subject has been using falsified employment references for years. Also found evidence of insurance fraud from 2019. We'll have full report by tonight. I leaned back in my kitchen chair and looked around my modest apartment. Same furniture, same view, same everything. But somehow, it all looked different. Now. For 3 years, I'd let my family treat me like a charity case. I'd smiled and nodded while they made decisions about my life, offered unsolicited advice about my finances, and generally acted like I was their responsibility instead of their equal. Last night, Courtney had finally said out loud what they'd all been thinking. That I was a pest, a burden, someone to be tolerated rather than respected. Well, young witch, welcome to my world. In this world, pests have teeth. And mine were about to get very, very sharp. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Time to see what other surprises I could arrange for the woman who thought she could insult me in my own home. This was just the beginning. By the time I was done with Courtney Morrison Hayes, she'd be begging to trade places with any pest she could find. But first I had some phone calls to make. Some very interesting phone calls to some very powerful people who owed me favors. Being invisible for 30 years had its advantages. People forgot you were listening, but they also forgot you were making connections, building relationships, accumulating influence. Courtney was about to learn that the pest she dismissed had more power in her little finger than a spoiled princess could accumulate in a lifetime of manipulation and empty threats. This was going to be fun. Marcus Chen's preliminary report arrived at 4 p.m. It was delivered by encrypted email to an account that existed solely for sensitive communications. I'd learned years ago that information was the most valuable currency in the world, and information acquired discreetly, it was worth its weight in gold. What I read made me laugh out loud for the first time in months. Courtney Morrison Hayes wasn't just a liar. She was a masterpiece of deception, carefully crafted over years of practice. The woman who'd called me a pest had built her entire life on a foundation of fraud so elaborate, it was almost artistic. Her employment at Prestige Planning was even shakier than I'd suspected. She'd been hired as a part-time administrative assistant 18 months ago, but had been telling everyone, including Michael, that she was a senior event coordinator. Her actual job responsibilities included answering phones, filing paperwork, and occasionally helping set up chairs at small corporate events. Her salary? $28,000 a year. For a woman who spent more than that on handbags, the math simply didn't add up. But Marcus had found the missing pieces of the puzzle. and they painted a picture of someone who'd been living far beyond her means. For years. Credit card debt, $127,000 across 8 different cards. Student loans, $45,000 currently in default. Personal loans from 3 different companies, $23,000, 2 months behind on payments. Car payment, $800 a month for a BMW she leased under false income statements. The girl was drowning, and the only thing keeping her afloat was Michael's steady income and the artificially low rent they'd been paying for an apartment worth 3 times what I was charging them. But the financial information was just the appetizer. The real feast was in Marcus's investigation of her past. Northwestern University had no record of Courtney Morrison Hayes ever completing their marketing program. She'd attended a weekend seminar on event planning, a continuing education course that cost $300 and came with a certificate suitable for framing. She'd been using that certificate to claim she had a bachelor's degree in marketing for the past 6 years. Her previous employment history was a masterclass in resume fraud. She'd worked as a hostess at an upscale restaurant in Lincoln Park, but told future employers she'd been the hospitality coordinator. She'd spent 3 months as a retail associate at Nordstrom, which became luxury brand specialist on her LinkedIn profile. A brief stint answering phones at a law firm became legal administrative assistant with client relations responsibilities. Every job had lasted less than a year. Every job had ended with her departure coinciding with some kind of internal investigation or reorganization. But my favorite discovery was buried on page 12 of Marcus's report. Courtney Morrison had legally changed her name when she was 23. Her birth name? Courtney Kowalski, from Cicero, Illinois. A working-class neighborhood that was about as far from the sophisticated image she'd crafted as you could get. She'd literally reinvented herself from the ground up, turning Courtney Kowalski, daughter of a factory worker and a grocery store clerk, into Courtney Morrison Hayes, sophisticated, woman of mystery with a hyphenated name that suggested old money and good breeding. It was brilliant, really. Almost admirable. If she hadn't used her creative talents to insult the wrong woman over pot roast. I closed the report and immediately called Marcus. "Impressive work," I said. "How did you get so much so quickly?" "Your daughter-in-law is not as careful as she thinks she is. Social media mostly. People post everything online these days. They just don't realize how much information they're giving away. Her Instagram alone was a treasure trove." "What else do you have?" "The insurance fraud is solid. She staged a break-in at her previous apartment and filed claims for stolen jewelry that didn't exist. Got away with about $8,000 before the insurance company got suspicious and quietly settled rather than prosecute. Evidence? Police reports, insurance documents, surveillance footage from the apartment building that shows her entering and leaving multiple times on the night of the supposed break-in. She was carrying large bags on the way out." I smiled. "What about personal relationships?" "That's where it gets really interesting. She's been married before." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" "Marriage license in Nevada 4 years ago. Courtney Kowalski married a guy named Brad Peterson, divorced him 8 months later. Peterson was a software engineer. Good. Income, clean credit. The divorce was messy. She took him for alimony despite the short marriage. Claimed emotional distress." My blood ran cold. She never told Michael she'd been married before. "It gets better. I tracked down Peterson. He's remarried now, living in Denver, but he was very chatty about his ex-wife once I explained I was conducting a background check for insurance purposes. According to him, she married him for his money. Spent 8 months maxing out credit, cards in his name, then filed for divorce, claiming he was emotionally abusive. He had to declare bankruptcy to deal with the debt she'd accumulated. I felt sick thinking about Michael, my gentle son, who believed in love and loyalty and happily ever after. He had no idea he'd married a predator. "There's more," Marcus continued. "I found evidence she's been having an affair." "With who?" "Richard Blackwood, managing partner at Blackwood and Associates. They've been meeting at hotels twice a week for the past 6 months. He's married, 62 years old, worth about $15 million. I'm guessing he doesn't know she's married either." The pieces were falling into place now. Courtney wasn't just living beyond her means, she was actively hunting for her next target. Michael had been a stepping stone. a way to maintain her lifestyle while she searched for a bigger fish. Richard Blackwood was that fish. "I need everything you can get me on this affair," I said. "Photos, hotel receipts, phone records, everything. Already on it. I'll have a complete file by tomorrow. And Marcus, start looking into Richard Blackwood too. If he's Courtney's next target, he deserves to know what he's getting into." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone and thinking about my son. Michael had called twice since the eviction notice was served, but I hadn't answered. I knew he was confused, hurt, probably angry. But I also knew that sometimes the people we love most are the hardest ones to save from their own poor choices. Courtney wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional. She'd made a career out of finding decent men, marrying them, destroying their finances, and moving on to the next victim. Michael was never going to be enough for her, not because he wasn't good enough, but because she was fundamentally incapable of genuine love or loyalty. The affair with Richard Blackwood proved that. She was already shopping for Michael's replacement before she'd even bothered to divorce him. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this." I don't understand what's happening. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "You'll understand soon enough. Some lessons can't be taught, only learned." Then I turned off my phone and opened my laptop. Time to start phase 2 of my campaign. If Courtney Morrison Hayes thought losing her apartment was devastating, she was about to discover that was just the warm-up act. I started with her employer. Prestige Planning's website showed they specialized in high-end corporate events and exclusive private parties. Their client list included some of Chicago's most prestigious companies and wealthiest families, the kind of clients who expected absolute discretion and impeccable credentials from anyone handling their events. I wondered how they'd react to discovering one of their employees had falsified her education, lied about her experience, and committed insurance fraud. I composed an anonymous email to Prestige Planning's Human Resources Department. Nothing dramatic or obviously vindictive. Just a concerned citizen who discovered some inconsistencies in an employee's background and felt the company should be aware of potential liability issues. I included copies of Courtney's fake Northwestern University certificate alongside the real records showing she'd only completed a weekend seminar. I included her inflated job descriptions from previous employers next to the actual job duties those employers confirmed she'd performed. And I included the insurance fraud documentation, presented as potential evidence of character issues that might affect her ability to handle client valuables and event budgets. All very professional, very concerned citizen, very impossible to trace back to me. The email was scheduled to arrive in their inbox first thing Monday morning. Next, I turned my attention to Courtney's credit situation. She was already drowning in debt, but she'd been managing to keep her head above water through a combination of minimum payments, balance transfers, and sheer desperation. Time to eliminate those options. I'd learned over the years that card companies were remarkably responsive to anonymous tips about potential fraud, especially when those tips came with documentation. A few carefully placed phone calls to report suspicious activity, large purchases inconsistent with stated income, possible identity theft, concerns about synthetic identity fraud. And Courtney's credit cards would be frozen faster than she could say Nordstrom sale. By Wednesday, I'd made 6 phone calls to 3 different credit monitoring services and 5 credit card companies. Each call was from a different phone number, using a different name and backstory, reporting concerns about suspicious activity on accounts associated with Courtney Morrison Hayes. The beauty of the credit system is that it's designed to err on the side of caution. When multiple reports of potential fraud come in, the automatic response is to freeze accounts and launch investigations. Those investigations can take weeks to resolve. And during that time, the cardholder has no access to credit. For someone like Courtney, who probably charged her daily coffee to a credit card, it would be catastrophic. But I saved the best for last. Richard Blackwood's wife was Caroline Blackwood, prominent Chicago socialite and chair of the board for the Museum of Contemporary Art. According to her public bio, she was also a major donor to women's charities and a vocal advocate for marriage equality and family values. I wondered how she'd feel about her husband's twice-weekly hotel visits with a married woman 20 years his junior. The photos Marcus had provided were tasteful, but unmistakably intimate. Richard and Courtney entering and leaving the Palmer House Hotel, holding hands as they walked through Grant Park, sharing champagne at a restaurant downtown. Nothing pornographic, but everything you'd need to prove an affair. I composed another anonymous email, this one to Caroline Blackwood's personal assistant. The message was simple. Someone thought she should know about her husband's activities. Enclosed were some recent photographs, and the sender hoped Mrs. Blackwood would use the information wisely. That email was scheduled to arrive Thursday morning. By the time I finished my evening's work, I felt like a chess master who'd just placed 6 different pieces in position for a devastating series of moves. Courtney had no idea what was coming. But by next Friday, every pillar of her carefully constructed life would be crumbling simultaneously. Her job would be gone. Her credit would be destroyed. Her affair would be exposed. Her secret marriage would be revealed. Her financial house of cards would collapse completely. And through it all, she'd have no idea that the woman she'd called a pest was orchestrating her destruction from a modest apartment 3 miles away. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a toast to the empty room. "Here's to pests," I said aloud. "May we always be more dangerous than we appear." Tomorrow would bring more revelations from Marcus's investigation. More opportunities to demonstrate exactly what happened when someone underestimated Margot Robbie. But tonight, I was content to sit in my small apartment, surrounded by my modest furniture and my secret empire, and plan the next phase of Courtney Morrison Hayes' education. Some lessons are expensive, dear. And you're about to get a master. Class in the cost of disrespecting the wrong woman. Sweet dreams. Tomorrow, your real nightmare begins. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crisp October clarity that makes everything seem possible. I woke up at dawn, feeling like a general, preparing for the most important battle of her career. Today, the first real salvos of my war against Courtney Morrison Hayes would be fired, and I wanted to have the perfect vantage point to watch the explosions. I dressed carefully in my usual understated style, gray slacks, white blouse, comfortable walking shoes. To anyone watching, I looked like exactly what I'd always appeared to be, a woman of modest means going about her ordinary day. The invisibility cloak that had served me so well for decades. At 8:30 a.m., I positioned myself at a coffee shop directly across from Prestige Planning's downtown office. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I had a perfect view of their Kraus reception area and the elevator bank that served the building's upper floors. My anonymous email had been delivered to their HR department at 6 a.m. By now, someone would have read it, probably forwarded it to management, and begun the process of verifying the information I provided. Corporate bureaucracy moves slowly, but when potential fraud is involved, it can move surprisingly fast. I ordered a latte and settled in to wait. At 9:15, I spotted Courtney emerging from the elevator, and I had to admit, she looked stunning. Even facing eviction and the stress of our confrontation, she'd managed to put together an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Black designer suit, shoes that clicked authoritatively against the marble floor, hair and makeup that belonged in a magazine. She walked into the Prestige Planning office with the confidence of someone who owned the world. That confidence lasted approximately 23 minutes. At 9:38, Courtney reappeared in the lobby. But this time, she wasn't walking with authority. She was being escorted by a security guard who was carrying a small cardboard box that I assumed contained her personal belongings. Her face was pale. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged around her eyes. She'd been fired. I watched her stand on the sidewalk outside the building, clutching her box and looking around like she wasn't sure where to go next. She pulled out her phone, probably to call someone, but after a few moments, she put it away without dialing. Who could she call? Michael was at work, and probably still furious about the eviction. Her parents in Cicero didn't know about her fake persona and wouldn't understand her problems. Her affair partner couldn't be contacted during business hours without raising suspicions with his wife. For maybe the first time in her adult life, Courtney Morrison Hayes was truly alone. I finished my latte and walked home, feeling a satisfaction that was both complete and slightly unsettling. I'd destroyed someone's livelihood with an anonymous email, and felt nothing but pleasure about it. But then I remembered her voice from Saturday night. Get a job and stop being a pest. She'd wanted me to understand my place in the world. Now she was getting a lesson in hers. My phone was ringing when I walked into my apartment. Michael's number on the caller ID. Mom, he said without preamble. Courtney just got fired. They said someone sent her company information about her background, and when they investigated, they found out she'd been lying about her qualifications. That's unfortunate, I said, settling into my favorite chair. Mom, What, sweetheart, did you have something to do with this? I considered the question seriously. Michael, your wife insulted me in my own home, called me a pest, and suggested I was a burden on society. She did this while living in an apartment I own, eating food I prepared, and drinking wine I paid for. What exactly did you think was going to happen? I thought you'd get over it. I thought we'd all calm down and work it out like adults. We are working it out like adults. Adult consequences for adult behavior. There was a long silence. Then she's devastated, Mom. She's crying and saying her whole life is falling apart. Her life was always falling apart, Michael. She was just good at hiding it from you. What do you mean? I hesitated. How much did I tell him? How much truth could he handle all at once? Ask her about her credit card debt, I said finally. Ask her about her previous marriage. Ask her about Richard Blackwood. Who's Richard? Blackwood? Ask her, Michael. I hung up before he could ask more questions. Some conversations needed to happen between Michael and his wife without my interference. But I wasn't done for the day. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Package delivered to Caroline Blackwood's assistant. Also, credit cards have started freezing. Subject tried to use American Express at lunch. Card was declined. She called the company. Account is under fraud investigation. Perfect timing. At 4 p.m., another update. Visa and MasterCard accounts. Both frozen. Subject was seen arguing with bank teller downtown. Attempted cash advance was denied. I imagined Courtney's growing panic as she realized her entire financial safety net was disappearing. No job, no credit, no way to maintain the lifestyle that defined her identity. But the best was yet to come. Thursday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Marcus called me at 7 a.m., sounding almost giddy with excitement. Caroline Blackwood received the photos yesterday afternoon, he said. She confronted her husband at their country club last night. Witnesses say she threw her martini in his face and announced to the entire dining room that she was filing for divorce and naming Courtney. Richard called her immediately after. They met at their usual hotel, but instead of their regular room, it was the parking lot. A friend of mine who works hotel security says she was seen crying in her car for over an hour after he left. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. 2 relationships destroyed, 2 sources of financial support eliminated, all because a woman thought she could insult me without consequences. There's more, Marcus continued. I did some digging into Richard Blackwood's business dealings. Turns out he's been embezzling from client accounts to pay for his affair with Courtney. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry. It all came out of his law firm's escrow accounts. How much? About $200,000 over 6 months. Caroline's divorce attorney is turning the information over to the State Bar Association and the district attorney's office. So Courtney hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been an accessory to embezzlement. Richard Blackwood was probably going to prison. And when that happened, investigators would want to talk to everyone connected to him, including his married girlfriend who'd been spending his stolen money. My phone rang again. Michael, calling for the 3rd time in 2 days. Mom, I need to see you. Can I come over? Of course, sweetheart. He arrived 20 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His usually neat appearance was disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he moved like someone carrying an enormous weight. She lied to me, he said, without preamble, sinking onto my couch like his legs couldn't support him anymore. About everything. Her job, her education, her previous marriage, the affair. Everything. I sat down across from him, watching my son's world crumble in real time. She was married before, he continued, his voice hollow. 8 months? To some guy in Nevada? She cleaned him out financially and then divorced him. She's been planning to do the same thing to me. How did you find out? I hired a private investigator after you mentioned Richard Blackwood. I needed to know the truth. He looked up at me with eyes full of pain. Mom, she's been cheating on me for months. Meeting this guy at hotels, spending money she didn't have, planning to leave me as soon as she could secure him as her next victim. I wanted to go to him, to hold him like I had when he was small and the world seemed too big and scary. But he needed to feel this pain, needed to understand what kind of person he'd married. I'm sorry, I said simply. Are you? He asked, and there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. Are you really sorry, Mom? Or is this exactly what you wanted to happen? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I wanted you to see the truth, I said. Finally. Yes. I wanted you to understand what kind of person you married before she destroyed your life the way she's destroyed other people's lives. So, you orchestrated all of this? The eviction, her losing her job, the credit, cards, exposing the affair, all of it? It wasn't really a question, and I didn't insult his intelligence by denying it. She called me a pest, Michael. She told me to get a job and stop bothering people who were actually building something with their lives. She said this in my own home, after I'd been supporting both of you for 3 years without you even knowing it. Michael stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. 3 years? What do you mean supporting us? I own your apartment building. I've been subsidizing your rent since you moved in. The market rate for that unit is $4,500 a month. You've been paying $1,800. His face went white. We've been living on your charity this whole time? You've been living in my property at a family discount. There's a difference. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to believe you were independent. And because I thought the woman you married deserved a chance to prove she was worthy of you. I leaned forward, looking directly into my son's eyes. She wasn't worthy of you, Michael. She never was. She married you because you have steady income and good credit. She was planning to leave you as soon as she found someone richer. The only reason it took her this long was because she's been living so far beyond her means that she needed time to find the right target. Michael put his head in his hands. How did I not see it? Because you're a good person who believes in love and commitment. You assumed she felt the same way. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, Chicago continued its busy life, unaware that in a small apartment on the north side, a mother was watching her son learn the hardest lesson life has to offer, that some people are exactly as selfish and cruel as they appear to be. What happens now? Michael asked finally. Now you decide what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be someone who enables destructive behavior, or someone who demands better from the people in his life? And Courtney? Oh. I smiled, feeling that cold satisfaction again. Courtney is about to learn that actions have consequences, real consequences that can't be charmed away or manipulated around. Mom? Michael looked up at me with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. Just how much money do you actually have? I considered the question. My son had just watched his entire life fall apart. He'd learned that his mother wasn't the harmless woman he thought she was, that his wife was a predator, and that everything he'd believed about his own independence was an illusion. Maybe it was time for one more revelation. Enough, I said simply. More than enough. And for the first time in a week, I saw a flicker of a smile on Michael's face. Enough to make sure Courtney never bothers us again. Oh, sweetheart, I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. We're just getting started. By Friday morning, Courtney Morrison Hayes was experiencing what I like to call full system failure. Every pillar of her carefully constructed life had been systematically demolished, and she didn't even know who was swinging the wrecking ball. I woke up feeling energized and purposeful, like an artist putting the finishing touches on her masterpiece. Over coffee, I reviewed the latest updates from Marcus Chen, and the picture they painted was even more satisfying than I'd hoped. Courtney's employer hadn't just fired her. They'd reported her to the Better Business Bureau for fraudulent credentials, effectively blacklisting her from the event planning industry in Chicago. Her credit cards weren't just frozen. The fraud investigations had triggered automatic reports to credit agencies, destroying her credit score overnight. And Richard Blackwood's wife hadn't just confronted him about the affair. She'd hired a forensic accountant who'd discovered the embezzlement, leading to criminal charges that would be filed within days. But the crown jewel of my revenge was yet to come. At 10 a.m., I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a woman's voice, shaking with anger, said, "Is this Margot Robbie speaking?" "This is she." "This is Caroline Blackwood. I believe we need to talk." Caroline Blackwood, Richard's soon-to-be ex-wife, chair of the Museum of Contemporary Art Board, and one of Chicago's most prominent socialites. Also, as of yesterday, a woman who discovered her husband had been stealing from his clients to fund an affair with a married gold digger. "I'm listening," I said. "I received some photographs this week, photos of my husband with a young woman. I did some investigating and discovered that woman is your daughter-in-law. Former daughter-in-law, I hope. I also discovered that you were the one who sent me those photographs." I felt a moment of concern. I'd been so careful to keep my involvement anonymous, but perhaps I'd underestimated Caroline Blackwood's resources. "What makes you think that?" I asked. "Because I had my own investigators look into everyone connected to this situation. Imagine my surprise when I learned that the modest single mother who owns Courtney Morrison Hayes' apartment building is actually worth $60 million. So much for staying invisible." But Caroline's voice didn't sound accusatory. It sounded admiring. "I'm curious," she continued. "What exactly did that little witch do to earn your attention?" I found myself smiling. "She called me a pest and told me to get a job." Caroline's laughter was sharp and delighted. "A pest? Oh, my dear, she had no idea who she was dealing with, did she?" "None whatsoever." "Well, I wanted to call and thank you. Without those photographs, I might never have discovered what Richard was doing. Not just the affair, but the embezzlement. He's been stealing from clients for months to pay for his midlife crisis." "I'm sorry you had to find out that way." "Don't be. I'm filing for divorce and pressing charges. Richard's going to prison, his law license is being revoked, and every penny he stole will be recovered, including the money he spent on that parasitic little—" The venom in Caroline's voice was beautiful to hear. "There's more," she continued. "I've made some calls to friends in the hospitality and events industry. Courtney Morrison Hayes won't work in Chicago again. Not in any capacity. Her reputation is completely destroyed." "That's very thorough of you." "I protect what's mine, Mrs. Robbie, and I assume you do the same." "Indeed, I do." "Then perhaps we should meet for lunch sometime. I have a feeling we have a lot in common." After I hung up, I realized I'd just made an ally in one of Chicago's most powerful women. Caroline Blackwood commanded the kind of social influence that could destroy someone's reputation with a few well-placed phone calls, and she'd apparently decided to add her considerable weight to my campaign against Courtney. The young witch had made enemies of two women who collectively controlled more resources than some small countries. At noon, Michael called with an update that made my day complete. "She's gone, Mom," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice for the first time in days. "Courtney packed her stuff and left this morning. Said she was going to stay with friends until she could figure things out." "Did she say which friends?" "That's the thing. I don't think she has any real friends. Everyone she associated with was either through work or through that affair. Now that both of those are gone," I felt a moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. Courtney had built her entire social network around utility rather than genuine connection. She'd collected people like accessories, keeping them only as long as they served her purposes. Now she was discovering what happened when you treated relationships as transactions. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Honestly, better than I expected. It's like waking up from a bad dream. I can see now how she was manipulating me, isolating me from friends and family, making me doubt my own judgment about things." "Gaslighting," I said. "It's a classic technique." "Yeah, well, it worked for a while. But seeing all this evidence of who she really is..." Mom, I feel like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. You're not an idiot. You're trusting. There's a difference. Maybe too trusting. No such thing, as long as you learn from the experience. That afternoon brought news that was almost anticlimactic after everything that had already happened. Marcus called to report that Courtney had been questioned by police in connection with Richard Blackwood's embezzlement case. She wasn't being charged yet, but she was definitely a person of interest. They're looking at her as a potential co-conspirator, Marcus explained. All those expensive dinners and hotel rooms were paid for with stolen money. Even if she didn't know where the money came from, she certainly benefited from it. What's the likely outcome? Best case for her, she's a witness in the prosecution's case against Blackwood. Worst case, she's charged as an accessory after the fact. Either way, her name is going to be in the papers when this goes to trial. The papers. I hadn't even thought about media attention, but of course there would be coverage. A prominent attorney stealing from clients to fund an affair was exactly the kind of story Chicago's newspapers loved. Courtney Morrison Hayes, the woman who'd built her entire identity on image and status, was about to become infamous for all the wrong reasons. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. I sat at the bar, ordered their finest bottle of champagne, and raised a quiet toast to my reflection in the mirror behind. The bottles. Here's to pest control, I said quietly. The bartender, a distinguished gentleman who'd probably heard stranger toasts, simply smiled and nodded. As I sipped my champagne, I thought about the week that had passed. 7 days ago, I'd been dismissed as a harmless old woman who should be grateful for her family's tolerance. Tonight, I was sitting in a restaurant that cost more per meal than most people spent on groceries in a month, celebrating the complete destruction of someone who'd underestimated me. The best part wasn't the money I'd spent, or the power I'd wielded. The best part was how easy it had all been, once I decided to stop hiding who I really was. For 30 years, I'd cultivated invisibility as a survival strategy. I'd let people underestimate me, dismiss me, overlook me. I'd worn my modest lifestyle like camouflage, hiding my true capabilities behind a facade of ordinary middle-aged womanhood. But sometimes, just sometimes, it was necessary to show your teeth. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've destroyed my life for no reason. I'll make you pay for this. Courtney, of course. Probably sent from a friend's phone since her own service had likely been cut off for non-payment. I finished my champagne, paid my tab, and walked out into the Chicago night feeling absolutely no fear whatsoever. Threats from someone who'd lost everything they'd ever had were just noise. Besides, I wasn't done with her yet. Destruction was only the first phase of my plan. The second phase was going to be much more interesting and much more permanent. Some lessons, after all, need to be reinforced to make sure they stick. Sweet dreams, young witch. Tomorrow you discover what happens when you threaten a woman who has the resources to bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my door. I was enjoying coffee and reading the Chicago Tribune's business section. Richard Blackwood's arrest had made the front page of the financial news, complete with a photo of him being led away in handcuffs, when someone knocked. Through the peephole, I saw my father standing in the hallway, looking older than his 78 years and deeply uncomfortable. We hadn't spoken since the dinner party 6 days ago, and I wondered what had finally motivated him to seek me out. "Dad," I said, opening the door. "This is a surprise. Margot, we need to talk." His voice was subdued, lacking its usual hearty confidence. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside to let him enter, noticing how he looked around my modest apartment with new eyes. The same furniture he'd dismissed as adequate but uninspiring for years suddenly seemed to be under closer scrutiny. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please." I poured him a cup and settled into my favorite chair, waiting. After 4 decades of being Walter Robbie's daughter, I knew when he had something difficult to say. "Sandra left me," he said finally. I kept my expression neutral, though I wasn't entirely surprised. Sandra's marriage to my father had always been based on financial security rather than love, and recent events had probably caused her to reevaluate her investment. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't really sorry at all. "She said she couldn't stay married to someone whose family was involved in scandals." He made air quotes around the phrase, his face bitter. "Apparently, having a daughter who destroys people's lives isn't good for her social reputation." I sipped my coffee calmly. "Is that what you think I did? Destroyed someone's life? Didn't you?" He leaned forward, his expression more serious than I had seen it in years. "Margot, I've heard things about what happened to Courtney, about her losing her job, about the eviction. People are saying you orchestrated all of it." "What people? Does it matter? The point is, everyone knows you're behind. What happened to that girl?" "That girl called me a pest in my own home and told me to get a job while eating food I prepared and living in an apartment I own. What exactly did you expect me to do?" Dad sat back in his chair, studying my face. "Own an apartment? Margot, what are you talking about?" So, Michael hadn't told him yet. Interesting. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for just such a conversation. Inside were copies of property deeds, bank statements, and financial documents that would shatter everything my father thought he knew about my life. "This apartment building," I said, handing him the first document. "I own it. Have for 5 years. Dad's eyes widened as he read the deed. "This one too," I continued, showing him more paperwork. "And this one, and this commercial property downtown, and these investment accounts, and these stock holdings." With each document, his face grew paler. By the time I'd finished, he was staring at papers that showed a net worth that dwarfed anything he'd accumulated in his entire working life. $62 million, I said quietly. "Give or take a few $100,000, depending on market fluctuations." "That's impossible," he whispered. "You work part-time at a flower shop. You drive an old Honda. You shop at Target." "I work part-time at a flower shop because I enjoy it, not because I need the money. I drive an old Honda because it's reliable and doesn't attract attention. I shop at Target because their clothes are perfectly adequate, and I don't need to impress anyone." I sat back down and looked at the man who'd raised me, who taught me the value of hard work and financial responsibility, who'd also abandoned my mother for a younger woman, and never seemed to understand the damage that betrayal had caused. "I've been wealthy for over 20 years, Dad. Longer than you've been retired. Longer than you've been married to Sandra. Longer than Michael's been an adult. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because being underestimated is the most powerful weapon I've ever had. Because people reveal their true selves when they think you can't hurt them. Because invisible women hear and see everything while everyone else assumes they're irrelevant." Dad stared at the financial documents spread across my coffee table like he was looking at evidence of an alien invasion. "All these years," he said slowly, "I thought you needed help. I thought you were struggling. Sandra and I talked about maybe helping you with rent or finding you a better job. You talked about me like I was a charity case, because you thought I was. And how did that make you feel, Dad? Having a daughter who needed your help, your pity, your condescension disguised as concern?" He flinched at the words but didn't deny them. "I felt sorry for you," he admitted. "I felt guilty about your mother, about the divorce, about how hard things were for you afterward. I thought maybe if I could help you get back on your feet. I was never off my feet. I was building an empire while you all patted yourselves on the back for tolerating my presence at family dinners." The silence that followed was heavy with 3 decades of misunderstandings and missed connections. "So when Courtney insulted you," Dad said finally, "when she called you a pest and told you to get a job, you decided to show her exactly what this particular pest was capable of, and now her life is destroyed." "Her life was always a lie. I just exposed the truth." Dad picked up one of the property deeds and studied it like it might suddenly make sense if he stared long enough. "Sandra was right about one thing," he said quietly. "You are involved in a scandal. Richard Blackwood's arrest is front-page news. They're saying he stole over $200,000 to fund an affair. When Courtney's name comes out as his mistress, she'll be publicly humiliated. Yes, I finished. That's rather the point. She's just a kid, Margot. A stupid, selfish kid who said something cruel without thinking. She's a 28-year-old woman who has made a career out of exploiting people? I paused, collecting my thoughts. She's a predator, and I'm an exterminator. That afternoon, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Amanda Richardson, producer of Chicago Stories, a local television program that specialized in human interest pieces and investigative segments. Amanda and I had met years ago at a charity fundraiser, back when I was still maintaining my facade of modest means while quietly making strategic donations to causes I believed in. She'd always struck me as intelligent and ethical, someone who cared more about telling important stories than generating ratings. Margot Robbie, Amanda said, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. This is a wonderful surprise. How have you been? I've been well, Amanda. I have a story I think might interest you. It's about a woman who's been preying on successful men, destroying their lives through fraud and manipulation, and it's all been documented with evidence that would make for compelling television. I'm listening. The woman in question recently called me a pest and told me to get a job, not knowing that I'm worth $60 million and own the apartment building where she lives with my son. There was a pause. Are you talking about Courtney Morrison Hayes, the woman from the Tribune article? I am. And I'm the person who provided that newspaper with their information. Jesus, Margot. When you said you'd been well, you weren't kidding. Amanda, this woman has destroyed at least 2 men's lives that we know of. She's currently living with her mother, planning her next move, probably looking for her next victim. I want to make sure that when she resurfaces, everyone knows exactly who she is. What are you proposing? A documentary segment. The Making of a Gold Digger. How one woman's lies destroyed multiple lives. You'd have access to all my documentation, interviews with her victims, financial records showing her pattern of behavior. Everything you need to tell the complete story. And you'd participate on camera. I hesitated. Going public would end 30 years of carefully maintained invisibility, but it would also ensure that Courtney Morrison Hayes never again succeeded in deceiving anyone. Yes, I said finally. Margot, this could be huge, not just for the show, but for you personally. This kind of story could make you a national figure. I'm not interested in fame, I'm interested in justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. We talked for another 30 minutes, outlining the scope of the documentary and the resources Amanda would need to tell the story properly. By the time I hung up, we had a tentative agreement. Chicago Stories would produce a 1-hour special on Courtney Morrison Hayes, with my full cooperation and access to all the evidence I'd gathered. The show would air in 3 weeks. That evening, Michael called with news that should have made me happy, but instead filled me with a strange sense of emptiness. Mom, the divorce is final, he said. The judge signed the papers this afternoon. It's over. How do you feel? Free, relieved, ready to start over. He paused. But also kind of sad, you know? Not about losing her, but about, I don't know, about how naive I was, about how completely I believed her lies. You believed them because you're a good person who assumes other people are good too. That's not a character flaw, Michael. That's what makes you worth loving. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Michael, are you going to be okay with the television documentary? I know it will bring up a lot of painful memories. Actually, I think it'll be good. Everyone at work, all my friends, they're going to see exactly what she was and understand that I was a victim, too, not an accomplice. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my modest lifestyle and my hidden wealth, thinking about what the next few weeks would bring. The documentary would make me famous, at least locally. It would end my anonymity, forever. But it would also ensure that Courtney Morrison Hayes never again succeeded in destroying someone's life the way she tried to destroy Michael's. My phone buzzed with another message from Courtney's number. Please stop. I'm sorry I said those things. I was drunk and stupid and I didn't mean it. I have nothing left. No job, no money, no place to live. You've destroyed everything. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this stop? I'm begging you, please, I'll do anything. I stared at the messages for a long time, feeling the weight of absolute victory. The woman who'd called me a pest was now begging for mercy from her motel room in Cicero, surrounded by the wreckage of the fake life she'd built. I could end it here. I could show mercy, allow her to rebuild, let her learn from her mistakes, and move forward with whatever dignity she had left. Instead, I deleted the messages without responding. Mercy was for people who showed remorse before they got caught, not after they'd lost everything and had nowhere else to turn. Besides, I wasn't quite finished with Courtney Morrison Hayes. Yet. Tomorrow would bring phase 3 of my plan, the part where I made sure her destruction was so complete, so thorough, and so well documented that she could never reinvent herself again. Some pests, after all, require very comprehensive extermination. Sweet dreams, young witch. Tomorrow you discover what it really means to cross someone who plays chess while you're still learning checkers. Friday morning brought an unexpected development that caught even me by surprise. I was reviewing Marcus Chen's latest intelligence reports over coffee when my doorman called to announce a visitor. Mrs. Robbie, there's a Miss Patricia Wong here to see you. She says it's urgent. Patricia never made unscheduled visits. If my financial advisor was standing in my lobby at 8 a.m. on a Friday, something significant had happened. Send her up, please. Patricia arrived looking uncharacteristically rattled, carrying her briefcase and an expression I'd never seen before. Something between excitement and concern. Margot, we need to talk, she said without preamble. Something's happened that changes everything. I poured her coffee and waited. Patricia was not given to dramatic overstatements, so whatever had brought her here was genuinely important. I got a call yesterday from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, she began. They're working on a story about successful women investors who operate under the radar. Apparently, your recent activities have attracted some attention in financial circles. My blood went cold. What kind of attention? The good kind, surprisingly. Your property acquisitions last week were noticed by commercial real estate analysts. 3 buildings purchased with cash in prime Chicago neighborhoods, all within 48 hours, all through different holding companies that trace back to the same source. People are calling it a masterclass in strategic real estate investment. I relaxed slightly. And then the Richard Blackwood story broke, and someone put together the connection between his mistress and the woman whose son she was married to. And then someone else noticed that the woman who owns that son's apartment building is the same person who just spent $5 million on strategic property acquisitions. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. Margot, you've become a case study. Business schools are going to teach classes about your approach to wealth building and strategic revenge. The Journal wants to do a profile on you as one of America's most successful stealth investors. Absolutely not. Hear me out. This could be incredibly beneficial for your portfolio. The kind of publicity that attracts high-level investment opportunities, board positions, strategic partnerships. Patricia, I've spent 30 years building my wealth in the shadows. I'm not about to throw that away for some magazine article. But think about what you could accomplish with that kind of visibility. The deals you could access, the influence you could wield. I already have more influence than I know what to do with, and I prefer wielding it quietly. Patricia sat back in her chair, studying my face. This isn't really about business strategy, is it? This is personal. This is about Courtney Morrison Hayes. Everything is about Courtney Morrison Hayes right now. Margot, you've already won. Her life is destroyed. Her reputation is in ruins. She's living in a motel, and she can't get a job anywhere in the city. What more could you possibly want? I stood up and walked to my window, looking out, at the city where I'd built my empire while everyone underestimated me. The question Patricia was asking was one I'd been avoiding. What was my endgame here? When would my revenge be complete? I want to make sure she never hurts anyone else the way she hurt my son, I said finally. I want to make sure that every man who meets her knows exactly what she is before she can sink her claws into him. And how do you plan to do that? I turned back to Patricia with a smile that made her visibly uncomfortable. By making her famous. That afternoon, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Amanda Richardson, producer of Chicago Stories. Amanda and I had met years ago at a charity fundraiser. She'd always struck me as intelligent and ethical. Margot Robbie, Amanda said, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. This is a wonderful surprise. How have you been? I've been well, Amanda. I have a story I think might interest you. It's about a woman who's been preying on successful men, destroying their lives through fraud and manipulation, and it's all been documented with evidence that would make for compelling television. I'm listening. The woman in question recently called me a pest and told me to get a job, not knowing that I'm worth $60 million and own the apartment building where she lives with my son. What followed was a systematic dismantling of her fraudulent life, culminating in her connection to a major embezzlement case that's currently making headlines. There was a pause. Are you talking about Courtney Morrison Hayes, the woman from the Tribune article? I am, and I'm the person who provided that newspaper with their information. Jesus, Margot. When you said you'd been well, you weren't kidding. Amanda, this woman has destroyed at least 2 men's lives that we know of. She's currently living with her mother, planning her next move, probably looking for her next victim. I want to make sure that when she resurfaces, everyone knows exactly who she is. What are you proposing? A documentary segment. The Making of a Gold Digger, How One Woman's Lies Destroyed Multiple Lives. You'd have access to all my documentation, interviews with her victims, financial records showing her pattern of behavior, everything you need to tell the complete story. And you'd participate on camera. I hesitated. Going public would end 30 years of carefully maintained invisibility, but it would also ensure that Courtney Morrison Hayes never again succeeded in deceiving anyone. Yes, I said finally. Margot, this could be huge. Not just for the show, but for you personally. This kind of story could make you a national figure. I'm not interested in fame. I'm interested in justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. We talked for another 30 minutes, outlining the scope of the documentary and the resources Amanda would need to tell the story properly. By the time I hung up, we had a tentative agreement. Chicago Stories would produce a 1-hour special on Courtney Morrison Hayes, with my full cooperation and access to all the evidence I'd gathered. The show would air in 3 weeks. That evening, Michael called with news that should have made me happy, but instead filled me with a strange sense of emptiness. Mom, the divorce is final, he said. The judge signed the papers this afternoon. It's over. How do you feel? Free, relieved, ready to start over. He paused. But also kind of sad, you know? Not about losing her, but about, I don't know. About how naive I was, about how completely I believed her lies. You believed them because you're a good person who assumes other people are good too. That's not a character flaw, Michael. That's what makes you worth loving. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Michael, are you going to be okay with the television documentary? I know it will bring up a lot of painful memories. Actually, I think it'll be good. Everyone at work, all my friends, they're going to see exactly what she was and understand that I was a victim, too, not an accomplice. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my modest lifestyle and my hidden wealth, thinking about what the next few weeks would bring. The documentary would make me famous, at least locally. It would end my anonymity, forever. But it would also ensure that Courtney Morrison Hayes never again succeeded in destroying someone's life the way she tried to destroy Michael's. My phone buzzed with another message from Courtney's number. Please stop. I'm sorry I said those things. I was drunk and stupid and I didn't mean it. I have nothing left. No job, no money, no place to live. You've destroyed everything. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this? Stop? I'm begging you. Please, I'll do anything. I stared at the messages for a long time, feeling the weight of absolute power over another person's life. With one phone call, I could stop the documentary. I could let her disappear into whatever new identity she created for herself. Instead, I forwarded the message to Amanda Richardson with a note. She knows we're coming. This makes the story even more compelling. Then I blocked Courtney's number entirely. Some lessons need to be public to be effective. Some consequences need to be permanent to prevent recurrence. And some people need to be exposed so completely that they can never again hide in the shadows to hurt others. Courtney Morrison Hayes had called me a pest and told me to contribute something to society instead of just existing on the margins of other people's lives. Well, young witch, I was about to contribute the most valuable thing I could think of. The truth about who you really are. Broadcast to anyone who might encounter you in the future. Consider it my gift to all the men you haven't destroyed yet. Sweet dreams. In 3 weeks, everyone in Chicago is going to know your name. 3 months later, I stood in the study of my family home, choosing my outfit for what would be the most important television appearance of my life. The documentary had taken longer to produce than Amanda had initially hoped. Real investigative journalism couldn't be rushed. But the extra time had allowed us to build an even more comprehensive case against Courtney's pattern of predatory behavior. I selected a navy blue suit that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, but looked understated on camera. Paired it with my mother's pearl earrings and applied my signature red lipstick with steady hands. If I was going to destroy someone's life on television, I was going to look elegant doing it. The documentary had been edited and was ready to air tonight at 8:00 p.m. Amanda Richardson had outdone herself, crafting a compelling narrative that painted Courtney Morrison Hayes as a master manipulator who destroyed multiple lives through calculated deception. The show featured interviews with Brad Peterson, her first husband, who described in devastating detail how she'd financially ruined him. Richard Blackwood, speaking from jail, admitted that Courtney had encouraged his embezzlement by constantly demanding more expensive gifts and experiences. Even Helen Morrison, Courtney's own mother, had reluctantly agreed to be interviewed after seeing the evidence of her daughter's crimes. But the centerpiece of the documentary was my interview. Filmed in my modest apartment with its carefully chosen furniture and hidden wealth, Amanda had masterfully contrasted my understated lifestyle with my enormous net worth, creating a portrait of a woman who'd built an empire while everyone underestimated her. The most powerful moment came when Amanda asked me why I'd gone to such lengths to destroy Courtney's life. She called me a pest, I said, looking directly into the camera. She told me to get a job and stop bothering people who were actually building something with their lives. She said this while living in an apartment I own, eating food I prepared, surrounded by wealth I'd accumulated through 30 years of strategic investing. She dismissed me as irrelevant while benefiting from my generosity without even knowing it. I'd paused then, letting the camera capture the cold calculation in my eyes. Some people think wealth is about buying things, but real wealth is about power. The power to protect the people you love and destroy the people who threaten them. Courtney Morrison Hayes threatened my son's financial and emotional well-being. So I used my power to eliminate that threat permanently. The documentary was devastating. By the time it finished airing, Courtney Morrison Hayes would be the most notorious gold digger in Chicago. Her face and story known to anyone who might become her next target. But first, I had one final scene to play out. At 6:00 p.m., 2 hours before the documentary aired, I received a call from my security company. Someone had triggered the motion sensors at my building's entrance and was refusing to leave despite repeated requests from the doorman. "It's a young woman," the security operator told me. "She's demanding to see you, says her name is Courtney and that you're expecting her." Of course she'd come. Cornered animals always made one final desperate attempt to escape. "Let her up," I said. I positioned myself in my living room, seated in my favorite chair with a glass of wine, and my laptop open to the Tribune's website, where the documentary was already being promoted as the most talked-about television event of the year. When Courtney knocked on the front door of the family house, I waited a full minute before answering. Let her stand on that porch, knowing that her entire life was about to be broadcast to the city, feeling the weight of absolute defeat. When I finally opened the door, I barely recognized her. The perfectly coiffed blonde hair was stringy and unwashed. The designer clothes had been replaced with ill-fitting jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt that suggested she was shopping at thrift stores now. Her trademark makeup was smudged. Her manicured nails were bitten down to the quick. And she looked like she'd lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Courtney Morrison Hayes looked exactly like what she'd become. A broken woman living in a cheap motel, surviving on whatever money her working-class mother could spare. "Hello, Courtney," I said pleasantly. "You look comfortable." She pushed past me into the foyer, her eyes wild with desperation. You have to stop this. The TV show, all of it. You've already destroyed my life. What more do you want? I closed the door and turned to face her, feeling remarkably calm for someone confronting the woman whose destruction I'd orchestrated so completely. What I wanted, I said, was for you to understand that actions have consequences. That you can't call someone a pest and tell them to get a job in their own home while they're secretly supporting your entire lifestyle. I said I was sorry. Her voice was shrill with panic. I apologized. I've been punished enough. Have you? I walked to my chair and sat down, gesturing for her to take the couch. She remained standing, pacing like a caged animal. Let's see. You lost your job, your apartment, your credit, your husband, your lover, your reputation, and your fake identity. But are you actually sorry for what you did or just sorry you got caught? Both. I'm sorry for everything. I should never have said those things to you. I should never have treated Michael the way I did. I should never have had the affair. I was terrible and selfish and stupid, and I've learned my lesson. And yet 3 weeks ago, you were texting me threats. 2 weeks ago, you were still lying to your mother about what you'd done. Even now, you're not here to genuinely apologize. You're here to try to manipulate me into stopping something that threatens your future plans. Courtney's face crumpled. Please, I'm begging you, I have nothing left. No money, no job prospects, no friends. I'm living with my mother in the house I grew up in, sharing a bedroom with my teenage niece. Everyone in my neighborhood has seen the newspaper articles. I can't even go to the grocery store without people staring at me. Good, I said simply. That means the system is working. The system? The system I designed to ensure that everyone who meets you knows exactly what you are before you can hurt them. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. The Tribune's website showed a large photo of her face next to the headline. Tonight, the making of a gold digger. In 2 hours, everyone in Chicago is going to watch a documentary about your crimes. Your face will be on television. Your story will be told in detail, and your name will be associated with fraud and manipulation forever. Courtney stared at the screen, her face going white. You can't do this to me. I can, and I am. And do you know why? I stood up and walked closer to her, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. Because you called me a pest. Because you looked at a woman who was supporting your lifestyle without your knowledge and decided she was beneath your notice. Because you're a predator who destroys good men for sport. And I have the power to make sure you never succeed again. I'll disappear, she said desperately. I'll leave Chicago, change my name again, start over somewhere else. You'll never have to see me or think about me again. But that's exactly what you did before, isn't it? You disappeared from Nevada after destroying Brad Peterson's life. You changed your name from Kowalski to Morrison Hayes and reinvented yourself as a sophisticated woman of mystery. How do I know you won't do it again? How do I know you won't find some other decent man to manipulate and destroy? Because I've learned. You've learned to be more careful. You've learned that some targets fight back, but you haven't learned to stop being what you are. I walked to my purse and pulled out a small device, a digital recorder I'd been running since she arrived. This entire conversation has been recorded, I said, including your admission that you plan to disappear and start over with a new identity. That recording will be added to the documentary's online materials along with everything else we have on you. Courtney stared at the recorder like it was a weapon pointed at her heart. You're not just destroying my life, she whispered. You're destroying any chance I have of rebuilding it. Exactly. I smiled, feeling that familiar cold satisfaction. That's rather the point. Why? Why are you so determined to ruin me forever? I considered the question seriously. It deserved an honest answer. Because 40 years ago, my mother was destroyed by a man who abandoned her for someone younger and prettier. She never recovered from that betrayal. She died broken and bitter, wondering what she'd done wrong to deserve such treatment. I paused, remembering the woman who'd raised me to be strong and independent, who taught me that self-reliance was the only protection against a world that would take advantage of kindness. You're the kind of woman who breaks people like my mother. You target men who believe in love and loyalty. You exploit their generosity and trust, and you leave them financially and emotionally destroyed. You're a predator, Courtney, and I'm an exterminator. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of traffic from the street below, and the ticking of my grandfather clock. Courtney stood in my living room, swaying slightly like she might collapse, staring at me with the dawning realization that there would be no mercy, no reprieve, no escape from what I'd built around her. "You're insane," she whispered finally. "I'm fairly corrected. There's a difference." She lunged for the recorder, but I was ready for that. I stepped back smoothly, holding the device out of her reach. "Even if you destroyed this recording, it wouldn't matter. Everything has been backed up, copied, distributed to multiple sources. The documentary airs in 90 minutes whether this recorder exists or not." Courtney's composure finally shattered completely. She sank onto my couch and began sobbing with a kind of desperate, ugly crying that comes from absolute hopelessness. "Please," she gasped between sobs. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I'll be your maid. I'll clean your toilets for free for the rest of my life. Just don't do this to me." The irony of her offer wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd called me a pest was now begging to become exactly what she'd accused me of being. "I don't need a maid," I said calmly. "I need you to understand that some mistakes can't be undone. Some insults can't be forgiven. Some people can't be allowed to continue hurting others." I walked to my window and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. In 90 minutes, thousands of people would be watching television, learning about the woman crying on my couch, understanding exactly what she was capable of. The documentary includes interviews with 3 other men you targeted before Brad. And Michael, I said without turning around. Men you met online, men you seduced with promises of love and commitment, men you left financially and emotionally devastated when you moved on to bigger targets. I heard her sharp intake of breath. She hadn't known I'd found them. "Marcus Chen is very good at his job. One of those men attempted suicide after you destroyed his credit and cleaned out his savings account. Another one lost his house. The third one is still paying off debts you accumulated in his name. I didn't know you didn't care." I turned back to face her. "You never cared about any of them. They were just stepping stones to something better, resources to be exploited until they were used up." "But I care about Michael," she said desperately. "I really did love him." "No, you didn't. You loved his steady income and his good credit rating. You loved that he was naive enough to believe your lies and provide a comfortable lifestyle while you searched for your next victim." I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick folder I'd prepared for this moment. "Richard Blackwood was your next victim," I said, opening the folder and showing her the photographs Marcus had taken. Wealthy, married, vulnerable to flattery from a beautiful younger woman. You were planning to destroy his marriage, take him for everything you could get, and then move on to the next target. That's not true. It's completely true. We have recordings of your conversations with him, Courtney. Conversations where you talked about how stupid his wife was, how you deserved his money more than she did, how you were planning to make him leave her for you. I pulled out a transcript and read from it. "She doesn't appreciate what she has. When we're together, I'm going to make sure you feel loved and valued the way you deserve." That was you talking about Caroline Blackwood. A woman who'd never done anything to you except have the misfortune of being married to a man you wanted to exploit. Courtney was staring at the transcript like it contained evidence of her own death sentence. "The recordings will be played during the documentary," I continued. "Along with the photos, the financial records, the evidence of your systematic predation of multiple men over several years. You've thought of everything," she said hollowly. "I told you I'm thorough." I closed the folder and returned it to my desk, then walked to where she was sitting. "Courtney Morrison Hayes, the woman who called me a pest, is about to become the most famous gold digger in America. Your story will be a cautionary tale, told in business schools and psychology classes. You'll be a case study in manipulation and fraud, and every man who Googles your name for the rest of your life will find detailed documentation of exactly what you are." She looked up at me with eyes that held no hope left. "What am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to live?" "The same way millions of other people live. By working for what you need. By being honest about who you are. By contributing something positive to the world instead of just taking from it." I walked to my front door and opened it. You have 90 minutes to get home before the documentary airs. I suggest you spend that time with your mother, explaining to her what she is about to see on television. Courtney stood up slowly, like her bones were protesting the movement. As she walked toward the door, she paused and looked back at me. You know what the worst part is? She said quietly. You were right. I am what you said I am. I am a predator. I have destroyed people's lives for money. I probably would have done it again if you hadn't stopped me. It was the first completely honest thing she'd ever said to me. Yes, I agreed. You would have. Does that make you feel better, knowing that you saved future victims by destroying me? I considered the question seriously. Yes, I said finally. It does. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. For what it's worth, she said, I really am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I am. Sorry for the people I hurt. Sorry for the man I made your son believe I was. I believe you, I said, but it doesn't change anything. I know. She walked through my door and toward the elevator, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Just before the elevator doors closed, she looked back at me one last time. You called me a young witch, she said. What does that make you? I smiled, feeling the same cold satisfaction I'd carried for weeks. Sweetheart, you called me a pest. But a pest is something that survives, something that adapts, something that's harder to kill than people expect. The elevator doors closed, and I was alone. I walked back into my apartment, poured myself another glass of wine, and settled into my favorite chair to wait for 8 p.m. At exactly 8, I turned on the television and watched Chicago Stories broadcast the complete destruction of Courtney Morrison Hayes to an audience of 500,000 people. The documentary was even more devastating than I'd hoped. Amanda Richardson had crafted a masterpiece of investigative journalism, presenting Courtney as a case study in predatory behavior, while positioning me as a brilliant strategist who'd used her wealth and intelligence to protect others from a dangerous manipulator. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By 9 p.m., social media was buzzing with discussions about the documentary. By 10 p.m., news outlets across the country were picking up the story. By midnight, the making of a gold digger was trending on Twitter, and Courtney Morrison Hayes had become a cautionary tale known nationwide. My phone started ringing at 8:15 and didn't stop for 3 hours. Interview requests from major networks. Congratulations from business associates. Expressions of support from strangers who'd watched the documentary and been moved by the story. But the call that mattered most came at 11 p.m. Mom. Michael's voice was warm with pride and something that might have been awe. I just watched the documentary. I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were amazing, but I didn't understand just how amazing until I saw you tonight. How do you feel about all of this? About having your private life broadcast on television? I feel protected, he said immediately. I feel like my mother fought for me in a way no one ever has before. I feel grateful that I have someone in my life who loves me enough to declare war on anyone who threatens me. And Courtney? Do you feel sorry for her? No? He said, and his voice was steady. She made her choices, Mom. She chose to lie, to manipulate, to hurt people for money. She chose to insult you in your own home while benefiting from your generosity. She earned what happened to her. You're sure? I'm sure. And, Mom, I'm proud to be your son, proud to be related to someone who refuses to let bad people win. After I hung up, I stood on my balcony looking out at Chicago, at the city where I'd built my fortune while everyone underestimated me, where I'd just fought and won the most important battle of my life. Somewhere out there, Courtney Morrison Hayes was probably watching news coverage of her own destruction, understanding that her life as she'd known it was over forever. Tomorrow, her face would be in newspapers across the country. Next week, clips from the documentary would be shown in journalism schools as an example of how to expose fraud and manipulation. Next month, business magazines would publish articles about my investment strategies and my approach to dealing with threats. I'd gone from invisible to famous overnight, from secretly wealthy to publicly powerful, from ignored pest to respected protector. And it had all started because a foolish, young woman had called me a pest and told me to get a job. I raised my wine glass in a toast to the city lights. Here's to pests, I said aloud. May we always be more dangerous than we appear. The next morning brought a new chapter in my life, one where I no longer hid my wealth or my capabilities, where people understood exactly what I was capable of when someone I loved was threatened. But that night, standing on my balcony in the aftermath of complete victory, I allowed myself to savor the perfect satisfaction of a job well done. Some people learn to respect others through kindness and patience. Others require more dramatic, educational experiences. Courtney Morrison Hayes had just graduated from the most expensive course in consequences ever designed, and I had been a very thorough teacher indeed.